Before we begin, an invitation: if this story touches your heart, leave your comment down below and subscribe to the channel, because every week I bring a new story for you to truly feel. Today we are going to talk about silence, about pride, and about a mirror that kept a secret longer than any living person in that house could have imagined. Come with me, and I will tell you this story. Teaser Iracema's hands trembled as she held the loosened frame. Behind the glass, clouded by time, a piece of thick, yellowed fabric began to appear under the carpenter's fingers. No one in the room was breathing. Dona Aurelina rose from the rocking chair so quickly that the coffee cup fell onto the wooden floor and shattered into pieces. But she did not even look down. "No," she whispered, her voice caught in her throat. "This cannot be here." The fabric was, in fact, a canvas, and on the canvas there was a face, painted in oil, faded by the decades, hidden in the dark. Behind the glass, a young woman with light eyes and a shy smile, wearing a party dress that had not been worn for 40 years. Iracema looked at that face and felt the ground open beneath her feet, because that face was hers. It was exactly hers. "Who is this woman?" she asked, and the question itself seemed to echo through the entire room, as if the walls of that old house had been waiting for years for someone with the courage to ask it. But for you to understand how we arrived at this moment, I need to go back a little in time. Let us begin at the beginning. The Acacia's farm was 2 hours of dirt road from the nearest village, surrounded by coffee plantations and a grove of guava trees that Dona Aurelina Vasconcelos tended with more care than she tended her own words. She was a woman of 70, straight-backed, white hair pulled into a severe bun, mistress of a house far too large for the silence that lived inside it. It was to this house that Iracema arrived one May morning, with a bundle of clothes and a box of threads and needles, hired to mend curtains, bed linens, and the old trousseau that had been accumulating for generations in the chests of the sewing room. "Do you know how to sew fine lace?" asked Dona Aurelina, examining the young woman from head to toe without hiding her distrust. "My mother taught me from the time I was little," answered Iracema, without lowering her eyes. "You may check the work before deciding if I stay." There was something in that firm reply, without arrogance or submission, that made Dona Aurelina lower her guard for a moment. She hired the young woman right there to work 6 days a week, with the right to sleep in a small room next to the kitchen. Vicente, grandson of Dona Aurelina, and the one responsible for managing the farm's production, was the one who showed the house to Iracema on the first day. He was 28, with calloused hands from working side by side with the field hands, and a slow way of speaking that gave the impression that every word had been carefully considered before leaving his mouth. "You will like the room," he said, carrying the young woman's bundle of clothes without her asking. "It is small, but the window looks out onto the orchard. In the morning the smell of guava comes into the whole house." "You did not need to carry that," said Iracema. "I know I did not need to," he answered with a half-smile. "I did it because I wanted to." It was in the main parlor, with its dark furniture and heavy curtains, that Iracema saw the mirror for the first time. It was enormous, with a carved wooden frame hanging above the marble console between 2 family portraits framed in silver. The glass was already stained at the edges, yet it still reflected the room with a strange clarity, almost uncomfortable. "Never touch that mirror," sighed Diosdate, the oldest caretaker on the farm, a man with thick hands and tired eyes, who'd worked there for more than 50 years. He said it quietly, almost without Iracema asking for an explanation, like someone who has repeated a warning so many times that it comes out automatically, not even to dust it. "Dona Aurelina herself takes care of it." "Why?" asked Iracema, curious. Diosdate shrugged and looked away, toward the window. "An old family matter. Better not to ask." In the weeks that followed, Iracema grew used to the house's routine. She mended sheets in the morning, helped in the kitchen at midday, and in the afternoon sat on the veranda to repair whatever was left of the day. Vicente always found a reason to pass by, bring in a glass of water, or asking about some embroidery stitch his mother used to do. It was on one of those afternoons that Iracema noticed, for the first time, a strange detail. The mirror's frame in the parlor was cracked in one corner, and a smell of damp wood came from behind it when the wind blew hard through the open window. "Vicente, look at this," she called, pointing to the crack. "I think that are termites eating the wood from the inside. If it is not taken care of soon, the whole mirror could fall." Vicente came closer, examined the frame carefully, and agreed. "You are right. I will call a carpenter to take a look." But when he mentioned it at dinner that night, Dona Aurelina set down her silverware with a sharp bang against the plate. "No one touches that mirror," she said, in a voice that left no room for reply. "If it is cracked, leave it cracked. The house is not going to fall because of an old mirror." The silence that settled over the table after that was so heavy that not even the sound of the crickets outside could disguise it. Iracema exchanged a quick glance with Vicente, who only shook his head discreetly, as if to say, "I will explain later." But he himself did not know how to explain, and that was the first clue that, in that house full of embroidery and family portraits, there was a silence kept for far longer than any sewing could ever mend. 3 weeks passed before Iracema managed to draw from Diaste anything more than an old family matter. It was on a morning of fine rain, while the two of them were peeling cassava in the kitchen, that the old caretaker finally gave in. "Dona Aurelina had a sister," he said, without taking his eyes from the knife. "A twin. Her name was Auristela." Iracema stopped working. "A sister. I've never heard anyone speak of that." "No one does," answered Dios. "It has been more than 40 years since her name has been spoken inside this house. Little by little, between one cassava root and the next, the story came out in pieces, like someone carefully untangling a knotted ball of thread without wanting to break the strand. Auristela and Aurelina were daughters of the former owner of the farm, raised together, alike even in the way they laughed. But while Aurelina accepted the fate of marrying the man the family chose, Auristela fell in love with Rosalvo, a young man who worked in the harvest, humble, without land, and without a surname that mattered to the girl's father. Their father would not accept it in any way, Dios they told. He said he would rather lose a daughter than see the family name mixed with that of a field hand. He sent both of them away, and he forbade anyone to pronounce Auristela's name within these walls, under penalty of losing their job. "And her portrait?" asked Iracema, remembering the 2 silver-framed pictures beside the mirror. "There was a third portrait," sighed Deusdedit, lowering his voice even more, "of the younger girl, painted by an artist who passed through the region. The father ordered everything that reminded him of her to be burned. Furniture, clothes, the portrait." He paused for a long time, as if weighing whether he should continue. "My mother worked here at the time. She did not have the courage to burn that portrait. She hid it behind a new canvas, and had a mirror made to cover the hole in the wall, where the old painting had hung all her life. No one noticed the difference. A mirror, a portrait, to someone looking from the outside, it is all the same. A frame on the wall." Iracema felt a shiver run down her arms. "So the portrait is still behind the mirror to this day. If my mother did not lie to me, and she never lied." "Yes," answered Yazdid. "And that is why no one can touch that mirror. Dona Aurelina knows what is behind the glass. She has known since she was a girl, and she prefers to carry that pain in silence, rather than risk someone discovering it." That same afternoon, the carpenter Vicente had called arrived at the farm to assess the termite damage. He was a middle-aged man with an attentive gaze and skillful hands, who examined the frame from outside and inside before giving his verdict. "The wood is completely infested," he told Vicente, shaking his head. "If you do not take the mirror off the wall now, the termites will move into the beam, and you will have a much bigger problem than a cracked glass." Vicente spoke with his grandmother that night, this time without beating around the bush. "Grandmother, you need to let the carpenter work. if we do not take the mirror down now. The man says it could compromise the entire wall. Dona Aurelina remained silent for a long time, looking at her own wrinkled hands in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice came out small, almost like a girl's. Do whatever needs to be done. Just ask him to be careful. No one understood, at that moment, the true weight of that request. The next day, with Iracema, Vicente, and Diasti present, began to loosen the frame from the parlor wall. The work was slow, because the old wood was fragile, and he feared cracking the glass. Dona Aurelina sat in the rocking chair in the corner of the room, her hands clasped tightly together, without saying a word. Her eyes fixed on the mirror, as if watching her own past being torn from the wall. When the carpenter finally managed to free the glass from the back of the frame, he found what Diasti already knew would be there. A thick canvas, folded and held with rusty nails, hidden between the wood and the glass. There is something back here, he said, surprised, carefully removing the nails. It looks like a painting. It was at that instant, that time. Inside that room, se met to stop. The carpenter carefully unrolled the canvas onto the dining table, and that was when the scene from the beginning of this story took place. Iracema's trembling hands, the broken cup on the floor, the painted face that was, astonishingly, her own face. Dona Aurelina brought both hands to her mouth. Auristela, she whispered, the name leaving her lips for the first time in 40 years, as if it had been trapped in her throat all that time, waiting for the right moment to come out. It is my sister. It is my sister, his portrait. Vicente looked between his grandmother and Iracema, trying to understand what his eyes were already beginning to suspect. Grandmother, why does this young woman look so much like the portrait? No one had a ready answer. It was Iracema who, with a voice thick with emotion, began to put the pieces together out loud. My mother's name is Zulmira. She never talked much about her family, only that her mother, my grandmother, had quarreled with the rich relatives before I was born and had never gone back. My grandmother's name is Auristela. The name fell upon the room like a stone into a deep well, the ripples spreading slowly until they reached every person present. Dona Aurelina began to cry, a restrained weeping of someone who has not allowed herself tears for decades and suddenly no longer knows how to control them. She had a daughter. My sister had a daughter, and that daughter had you, and I never knew. I never tried to find out. Do you know where she is? Asked Iracema, her heart racing. Dona Aurelina shook her head, ashamed. No. After she left with Rosalvo, my father forbade any contact, and I, God forgive me, was too much of a coward to disobey. I let my sister disappear from my life for fear of losing the rest of the family. It was Diasti who, after decades of silence, offered the first thread of hope. My mother used to receive letters from her, secretly, in the early years. The letters stopped coming a long time ago, but the last address she sent was of a village a day's journey from here, near the river. Maybe it is still possible to find something out there. Vicente did not hesitate. Then we will go there tomorrow morning. The journey was long, along the dirt roads that cut through the countryside. But no one in the small group formed by Vicente, Iracema, and Dona Aurelina herself complained of the fatigue. The village was small, a few streets, a white church, and a market that sold a little of everything. It was by asking from house to house, showing the rolled-up portrait they carried carefully, that they finally found a neighbor who recognized the painted face. That is Dona Auristela, said the woman, surprised. She lives over there in the embroidery house, near the fountain. She and her husband still make trousseaux for whoever asks. Dona Aurelina's heart was beating so hard that she needed to hold on to her grandson's arm to walk to the door. When they knocked, it was a gray-haired woman, her hands marked by decades of needle and thread. who opened the door and stood frozen upon recognizing, even after so many years, the face of her twin sister standing before her. "Aurelina," she whispered, as if she could not trust her own eyes. "Auristela," answered Dona Aurelina, and the two embraced right there on the doorstep, crying a cry that carried 40 years of dammed-up longing. Rosalvo, already an elderly man, appeared behind his wife and, upon seeing the scene, also could not hold back his tears. Inside the house, over freshly brewed coffee and still warm corn cake, the two sisters rebuilt decades in a few hours of conversation. Aristala told that she had had a daughter, Zulmira, raised with difficulty but with much love, who in turn had given birth to Iracema. She told that she had never stopped thinking of her sister, but pride on both sides had been greater than the courage to search. "I hid a portrait of yours behind a mirror, so they would not burn it," said Dona Aurelina, holding her sister's hands. "I spent 40 years looking at that mirror without knowing that, behind it, your face was still there, waiting for someone to have the courage to look." Back at the Acacias farm, weeks later, the family gathered in a way the big house had not seen for generations. Auristela and Rosalvo came to live in a neighboring house, close enough for the sisters to visit each other every day. Zulmira, Iracema's mother cried for hours upon reuniting with the mother she had barely known, and upon discovering an entire family she did not know existed. And in the middle of all this, Vicente asked Iracema to marry him, in the same room where the portrait had been found, now framed and hung with pride on the wall, beside the restored mirror, the two side by side, as they should have been from the beginning. "You brought my family back," said Vicente, holding her hands, "and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side." The wedding took place on the farm's veranda, under the guava tree, with the two sisters sitting side by side in the front row, holding hands as they had not done since childhood. There remains, in this story, a question that may be worth carrying into your own life. How many times do we hide behind a mirror that which hurts to look at directly? Pride has that silent way of convincing us that protecting the pain is the same as erasing it. But the truth, like the portrait in that room, does not disappear, eat only whites in the darkness, for the right moment to be seen again. Sometimes the hardest courage is not facing the world outside, but facing what one's own family insists on not speaking about. And sometimes the most beautiful love is the one that crosses decades of silence to prove that it never, in fact, ceased to exist. If this story touched you, leave down below what you felt most while listening. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel, because the next story is already on its way, waiting to touch your heart as well. A hug, and until next time.